Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the program. My name is William Hemsworth. Great to be back with you this week on another great episode. My guest this week is Stephen Arms. He lives in Portland, Oregon with his wife and children, and he co-authored a book with his father titled Milestone to Manhood, where Stephen shares his firsthand experience of his rite of passage weekend and reflects on how it shaped him into the man that he is today. Stephen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me, William.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad we can finally make this happen. I know we've been corresponding through email quite a bit. We all have children and things happen. So I thank you for your flexibility. I greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm just honored to be here.
All right. So before we get into your book, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Born and raised in the Bay Area of California, I spent the first 25 years of my life there. And then in 2017, I met my beautiful wife to be, Emily. So I made the plunge and moved up to Oregon, where my wife is from. And we got married in 2018. And now we have three beautiful children, 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So our hands are definitely full and our days are long, but it's totally worth it and it's a ton of fun. I love being a dad. It's one of the best parts of my life is being a father.
Oh, 100%. I look back on, I can't imagine anything else. Just hearing those words every day is it's just a blessing. It's great. So your book, what made you decide to co-author this book?
Yeah, the book is about a personal experience that I had when I was 13 years old. It's a family tradition that my dad and my grandfather started, and it's called a rite of passage. Essentially, um, my dad took me away for a weekend on my 13th birthday and surprised me with my grandfather and my two uncles, kind of the most important male role models in my life. And we went through we went to a cabin and they had some different kind of group exercises, rituals, like almost like a retreat type exercises. So a scripture sharing exercise, giving of letters, giving of a family heirloom, different rituals for the group to go through. And then at the end of the weekend, they told me, you are now considered to be a man in this family, just like one of us. So, really, the purpose of this whole rite of passage is to give a boy a moment in his life where he can recognize, I am no longer a boy, but I'm now a man. And the benefit of having that is that the boy doesn't have to try to prove that to himself, right? Um, in the absence of a rite of passage, in the absence of his father creating some sort of event and telling his son, I see you as a man now, then the boy is going to try to go prove it to himself in one way or another. And as you know, 13-year olds don't really have the best foresight. They don't always make the best decisions. So whatever that looks like for him trying to prove himself, usually it's not very pretty.
Yeah, as I told you off air, I have a 15-year-old, so I totally understand that. In addition to that, I teach middle school, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and I see that so much. So I totally hear what you're saying and preach into the choir. And I'm sure every other father and mother listening to this is going to feel the same way. So why the age of 13? In your book, that's a significant um, year that you've mentioned throughout your book. Why is the age of 13 important?
Yeah, we think that 13 is the ideal age for a rite of passage for a couple of reasons. One is that, it really mimics what we see in the Jewish bar mitzvah. That's probably the most
Okay.
famous or well-known version of a rite of passage that's still practiced today is the bar mitzvah. And that occurs when a boy turns 13. 13 years old is kind of a milestone birthday. Your son is going from a child to a teenager, so already it's kind of a big event in his mind, becoming a teenager. So it's already a big birthday for him. And we also find that 13 is kind of that sweet spot where the boy is old enough to understand some of the advice that's given to him. If you tell him he's a man and have these discussions at 10 years old, a lot of it's going to go over his head and he's not going to be able to soak it in.
Right.
But if you wait until he's 17, 18, 19 years old, well, he doesn't really want to listen to dad or other male role models at that point in his life either, right? an 18-year-old thinks he knows everything and doesn't want to listen to dad. So we think that 13 years old is kind of that sweet spot. Now, if you have a 14 or 15 or 16-year-old, I don't think that it's too late to hold a rite of passage for him. But by the time a kid is 18 or 21, I think that that ship has kind of sailed.
Okay. So who attends a rite of passage? Is it just the boy and his father, or is it someone else?
Well, definitely, fathers are undoubtedly the most important male role model in a boy's life. So ideally, it would be the boy's father who is organizing this event. Um, Boys look at their dads to to know what it means to be a man. He's looking at you and your actions day in and day out. But it's also important to get other men involved in your son's rite of passage because they can break through to him in a way that dad can't. They have just a little bit more emotional distance from him. They don't share the same roof as him. They don't live together. So by getting other men involved, men like his grandfather, his uncles, close family friends, maybe friends from church, by getting other men involved, they might say some piece of advice that you as dad has been saying for the last 2 years, right? You need to make your bed every morning. You need to make your bed every morning. But just hearing those words come out of the mouth of a man who's not dad, it's like, oh, I never thought about that before. Maybe I should try it. So yes, dad should be present. He should be leading this, but you should get other men involved because that is going to help to break through to your son in a way that he might actually listen.
So they're going to reiterate pretty much everything the dad's been saying, but the son's it's gonna hit a different way, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. We all have different life experiences and different perspectives and different stories. But by getting other men involved, um, it helps to make the weekend that much more memorable.
Okay. Now, how about Jesus? Did he have a rite of passage?
Good question. So Jesus did have a rite of passage. Um, I, I'm just stating the obvious here. Jesus was Jewish, so
Right.
some people think, well, maybe Jesus had a bar mitzvah. The bar mitzvah that we know today did not come about until around the year 1500. So it's only been around for 500 years.
Wow.
So, and as you know, Jesus was walking on the earth 2,000 years ago. So it's safe to say that Jesus did not have a bar mitzvah. That being said, he did have a rite of passage event, and his rite of passage is accounted in the Gospel of Luke. It's the story of the finding of the boy Jesus in the temple. And there's a few reasons why this story is Jesus's rite of passage event. One is that it occurs when he was 12 years old. The gospel writer includes that small detail that he was 12 years old. That's an important detail that was put in there for a purpose, right? This is the only story that we have of Jesus's childhood that's not related to his birth, is the finding of him in the temple. And then as you go through the story, there's three distinct phases of it that mimic the three phases of any rite of passage. So the first stage is there's a separation, right? Jesus is separated from his mother and his father in the caravan. He's separated from his normal support circles, right? Uh, we see in, like, for example, the Australian walkabout, which is another culture's rite of passage event. They send their boys off into the wilderness alone, right? There's this element of separation. So the first element of any rite of passage is a separation. The second element is a challenge. In Jesus's case, it was this 12-year-old boy having discussions with the teachers of the law, the scribes, about scriptures. And, here Jesus is God, Jesus is the Word himself. So obviously he has the upper hand in this case. But if you look at it objectively, you have a 12-year-old boy here talking to grown men about the scriptures. So that's kind of his challenge that he was presented with. And then the third element is this reincorporation back into the family, and with a marked difference. So Joseph and Mary eventually find Jesus. And what you notice is when Mary says something along the lines of, "Why did you do this to us? Didn't you know that we would be looking for you?" And Jesus's response comes off as kind of cold. He's like,
Right.
didn't you know that I would be in my father's house? He doesn't come running back to mom crying and saying, I missed you, right? He responds to his mother in a way that a man would respond, not in a way that a boy would respond. Um, and then there's also the line that says he he advanced in maturity uh, after that event. So uh, now Jesus's rite of passage, I have to say that that's kind of a one-off. I'm not recommending that for um, for our sons today. That's a different set of circumstances.
Right.
But I think it's interesting to note that Jesus did have a rite of passage at 12 years old, and I think for any Christian father, that is one reason why, another reason why we should be holding a rite of passage event for our sons.
Okay. And speaking of the event, what does the event look like? What does the weekend look like? Can you walk us through that for a little bit?
Yeah, so we have an element of separation as well, where the boy goes off with the men. In my case, it was my dad, my grandfather, my two uncles, and we went to a cabin in Lake Shasta, which is in Northern California, about 3 hours away from the Bay Area. So you kind of get out of hometown a little bit. And then, as I referred to earlier, there's different group. And these rituals kind of add context to the weekend. They put meat on the bones, because as men, there's this tendency when you put five men in a cabin at Lake Shasta with fishing poles and a boat, there's this tendency to just want to go fishing the entire weekend and not talk about anything deep, just stay at the trivial level. Um, because talking about what it means to be a man, talking about your your strengths and your weaknesses, talking about your faith with your son, that requires intimacy, right? That requires going deep. Um, but the rituals, these group exercises, help the group to engage in discussion that's actually helpful to the boy. So the first ritual is an entrance ceremony. Just like you might have at a wedding or a high school graduation, there's this formal entrance ceremony to mark the beginning of the event. Well, we have an entrance ceremony as well. We read from the book of Exodus, the passage of Moses encountering God in the form of the burning bush. Um, and and then the boy is tasked with lighting a fire inside the cabin at, during the entrance ceremony. The fire is a symbol of the Holy Spirit. Moses encountered God in the form of a burning bush. So by lighting a fire in the cabin, it signifies how God is with us during the weekend. And of course, God is always with us, but having that symbolism, it's a way for the boy to understand. Uh, it's a way for the boy to visualize the importance of his faith, and he's also tasked with keeping that fire going throughout the entire weekend. So that's the boy's challenge during the weekend, is that he has to maintain that fire for the whole 48 hours. Now that shows how, as Christians, sometimes our flame of faith gets hotter and sometimes it's colder. But what's most important is that we never let that flame become fully extinguished, right? That's part of being a Christian man, is that you have to work on your faith. That means things like daily prayer, receiving the sacraments, taking your family to church. Um, your relationship with God as a man is going to require work. You have to feed it, just like you have to feed a fire wood. So that's one example of one of the quote unquote rituals that we have during the weekend. There's also a discussion of what it means to be a man. There's a scripture sharing exercise. As I referred to earlier, letters are presented to the boy that the men have written out beforehand, and then a giving of a family heirloom. So in my case, my dad gave me a set of silver dollars coin collection that his dad had given to him. Not something with necessarily not a ton of monetary value, but a lot of sentimental and emotional value to the family. A sign that, now that your son is 13, you can trust him with things that have meaning to you. And then the culmination of the weekend is really the formal bestowing of the title of man. And that's when, in my case, I specifically remember my grandfather looking me in the eyes and telling me those words. In this family, you're no longer considered to be a boy, but you're considered to be a man now, just like the rest of us.
Wow. So how did the rite of passage impact your life and impact your faith?
Yeah, I would say really my rite of passage impacted my life in two ways. First of all, as a kid, I never really questioned my identity as a man because my dad and my grandfather told me you are a man. So I never really went through like, oh, am I a boy or am I a man? I just knew that I was a man because my dad and my grandfather had told me. And I don't mean to say that I had like huge biceps or I could grow a beard when I was a teenager. I just mean to say that I never questioned if I was a boy or a man. And I don't think that I ever tried to do things to try to prove myself as a man, like jumping off cliffs or, binge drinking,
Mhm.
getting into fights. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I did my fair share of stupid things. But I don't think that I was motivated by trying to prove myself as a man. Um, I was settled in that because my grandfather and my father bestowed that on me. It was a gift that was given to me. The second way that it really impacted my life was, and one thing that's said throughout the weekend is, now that you're a man in this family, you are a part of a tribe of men, and we love you unconditionally. We have your best interest at heart. You can come to us at any time and talk to us about anything. We are in your corner. And, as a 13-year-old boy, like I heard that and I shook my head up and down, but I did not really know what to make of it, right? Well, it wasn't until I got into college, here I am now 21 years old, and spending time with people who were raised very differently than me, had very different set of values than me, and it really made me question my faith. Um, I was nervous to go back to my mom and to my dad and tell them, Mom, Dad, I'm not sure if I believe in God anymore, because I did not want to disappoint them. I knew that they would be disappointed if I told them that, but I had serious doubts in college. And it wasn't, and then I remembered, in college, I remembered back to my rite of passage weekend and how all the men said, we love you unconditionally. We have your best interests at heart. You can come talk to us about anything. And those were the words that gave me the confidence to go back to my dad, to go back to my grandfather and say, Dad, Grandpa, I am not sure if I believe in God anymore. Why do you believe in God? And they shared more about their faith with me. Um, Hindsight is 2020. I can't say what would have happened otherwise, but there's a good chance that if it wasn't for this rite of passage weekend, I would not be a practicing Christian or a practicing Catholic today.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. That's powerful. It goes to show the influence that we have, and we should never take it for granted. So how about girls? So for someone who may not have a son and they just have all girls, can a girl have a rite of passage?
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a family of all boys. I have three brothers. But that being said, all of my female cousins did have a rite of passage weekend. It was very similar to the weekend that I had. The biggest difference is um, the biggest difference is probably that it's all the women of the family who take her out for her weekend, not the men of the family. Um, and then there's small changes as well. So I know for their rites of passage, instead of lighting a full blown fire in the fireplace, they do a candle and they keep the candle lit for the entire weekend. Um, there's an element in the male version of the rite of passage where the men collect sticks from outside and they use sticks for one of the rituals. The women don't do that; they use tiaras around their head, so just a more uh, feminine symbolism there. There's also an element of a quilt. So during the what it means to be a woman discussion, all of the women of the family come prepared beforehand with a square of a quilt. It might have a heart on it, a crucifix, or a tree, and they'll share with the group why they made this and what symbolism of virtuous womanhood this symbolizes. Um, and then once the group has all shared with the girl about this is what it really means to be a woman, then the girl organizes the different squares and the group puts it into a quilt. So at the end of her rite of passage weekend, she walks away with this quilt that her family members kind of made for her. One of those mementos that she can take with her throughout the rest of her life. Not something that we had in the male version of the rite of passage, but just a way to incorporate it for make it more appropriate for a female version of a rite of passage.
Sure. Our guest, Stephen Arms, and learn more at his website, milestonetomanhood.com. Stephen, the book's been out for a little bit. What feedback have you received so far?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive.
Great.
It's really cool to hear the stories of dads who have held rite of passages based off the book. This was not something that I started. My father and my grandfather came up with these rituals. They're the ones that started this family tradition. It wasn't until 2020, 17 years after my rite of passage weekend, that my dad approached me with the idea of putting this into a book and helping other fathers organize a rite of passage for their sons. Um, it's cool seeing, some dads just take the rite of passage weekend straight from the book and they do all 9 rituals, just like our family did them, which is incredible. And then there's other families who adapt the weekend and they totally make it their own. One father, he comes from a military background. He went through boot camp and all that. He's a Marine. He did a backpacking trip with his son, and his son's challenge was he had to carry a torch throughout the whole 20-mile backpacking trip. Like, now it
Wow.
wasn't an actual burning torch; it was a stick, and he put like a piece of foil with orange coloring on top, so it wasn't actually a fire. But his son is only 13 years old, and they went on a 20-mile backpacking trip while his son is carrying this thing. So I think he incorporated some of his military background into his son's rite of passage. Another dad did something that was really cool, where all of the men of the group, his son is more of like a bookworm type, loves to read, and all of the men of the group brought their one favorite or one most impactful book that they've ever read in their life, and they shared with the group, with the boy, how this book impacted his life, and then they all gave that a copy of their books to the son. So the son walks away from that weekend with 5 books that had impacts on the men in his life. And so I thought that was a really cool way to reach a boy. There's 2 examples of, one is more outdoorsy and physical, and here's another example of one who is more of a bookworm. But in both cases, they made it customized and unique for their own son.
Great. Where can our listeners learn more about your work and where can they get the book?
Yeah, the best place to get a copy of the book is our website, which is milestonetomanhood.com. And we also have a free resource there for your listeners. One thing that we found for dads who want to organize a rite of passage weekend, one of the most difficult parts is just explaining what a rite of passage is, why you want to hold one for your son, and what the weekend actually looks like. Because most other men don't have an idea of, like, why would you want to hold a rite of passage for your son, right? Because this is not something that we do in our culture anymore. We don't have a similar rite of passage event that happens at 13 years old. So on our website, if you go to the planning section, we've created free email templates where all a dad has to do is copy the text, paste it in a body of an email, and then identify the 3 or 4 men who he wants to invite on his son's rite of passage. And this email explains exactly what you're going to do for the weekend. This is what a rite of passage is. This is what I want to hold on for my son, and this is what it's going to look like. So we've literally given you the words that you need to organize a rite of passage. We've tried to make it as easy as possible for a father to pull off one of these weekends. So yeah, the best place is our website, milestonetomanhood.com, where you can purchase a copy of the book or get those free email templates.
Great. Well, I encourage everyone to go check it out. And Stephen, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and your book with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, William.
All right. God bless.
You too.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Discover the excitement. Discover the thrill. Discover Casino del Sol's 30th anniversary celebration. From world-class dining, luxurious accommodations, top-notch amenities, and unparalleled entertainment, nothing compares to the Casino del Sol experience. Celebrate our 30th anniversary with live weekly drawings and an invitation to our grand finale drawing on July 27th to win your share of $30,000. And don't forget, you won't want to miss our exciting firework extravaganza July 3rd. The celebration continues this summer, only at Casino del Sol, the soul of Tucson, an enterprise of the Pasco Yaqui Tribe.